Hello, this is Mr. Dramatic speaking. I just hit level 40 in Chaos Zero Nightmare and I got to the end of the main story in chapter 5. And I gotta be honest with you, in the grind from around levels 36 to 40, I fast forwarded more than a few parts of chapter 3 and chapter 4, and when I finally got to the end of chapter 5, bam! The emotional feeling hit me like a truck, and I was like, oh, so that's the real meaning of the story. And I want to say it's a good story, emotionally satisfying, and even better if you understood the heart of the story. The story right now is embroiled in a lot of controversy, but it's not for the reasons that you expect. I'm a dramaturg. Analyzing stories on stage and giving feedback is my job. So me and the stage director at Theatre House Dello, we have been talking it over this morning, and there were a lot of insights I discovered in the story when I was talking with her. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to give you my opinion of the story and where I think it could be improved. And because of the very nature of dramaturgical analysis, I will have to ask you to step away and read the story first. In the meantime, our stage director, Mr. Luz, has 4 questions for you, the reader, which I will use to frame my ideas. Number 1, what is the story actually about? Number 2, what the authors thought the story was about. Number 3, where the audience's instinctive rejection comes from. And number 4, and therefore, what the controversy must be. If you cannot answer these questions, don't worry. I'll answer them for you. But I would ask that you pause the video and read the story so you can actually enjoy my evaluation fully. I'll tell you my initial blue truths in 5 seconds. Okay, so here we go. My blue truths to Mr. Luz's precise diagnostic questions. Question number 1 is actually asking about the theme and the characters. The Haven story is actually written quite well in the style of reincarnated Cthulhu, but you have to read to the end in order to get it. That the theme is sacrifice. Most people are not going to get that. And that leads into question 2 and 3, which asks about the nature of the writing itself, the genre and the tropes that form the early part of the story. There is indeed a problem with genre, I think. It's not like in Princess Wars, where we tried to mix tragedy and comedy together in our own web novel, but rather I think that the problem is that there are girl tropes and there are boy tropes mixed together, which honestly makes it a very, very weird thing in the story. Question number 4 from Mr. Luz is the most pertinent question. What is wrong with the story? In my mind, the answer is really, really simple. Judas is the main character of the Haven arc. That's the problem. And although he is the antagonist, you feel more for Judas than anybody else at the end of the story. People have not caught on to that. People have not read to the end. Hence the emotional disconnect. But you have hopefully read the entire story, so you will be able to understand what I'm talking about in the next couple of minutes. But just in case, I'm still going to give you a very quick outline of the story from my point of view. The story of Chaos Zero Nightmare is about the SS Nightmare crew and the Protoss, spacefaring adventurers who command an arc which comes into conflict initially in chapter 1 with Sir Judas. Judas Kill. Initially, Judas is portrayed as the bad guy since he's chasing a heretic who is literally an Ichimaru-gin XP. And I would have to say the Protoss really made a mistake here, because you really shouldn't trust people with fox eyes, no matter how handsome or hot he is. This puts the SS Nightmare in conflict with Sir Judas. However, luckily, later on, the Pope girl Azalante invites the Protoss to their homeland, called appropriately Haven, to patch things up. And later there we learn about Judas's past as a hero, and their golden generation, the current golden generation, which is made up of the prophetess Aulia, the Pope Azalante, and the Knight Commander Luch, who, if I may add as an aside, are literally VTuber XPs, and I would not be surprised at all if Luch had a crystallization moveset. I mean, come on man, you gotta be a little bit less obvious than that when writing fanfiction. Anyway, in chapter 3, after the setup is done, we learn quite horrifyingly, Judas is sacrificing live people who wish to die to chaos. Well, not exactly chaos, Delos, but Delos is chaos with angels and mecha robo spiders. But that's not the point of the story right now. And he gets house arrest for his bad boy timeouts. During his bad boy timeouts, we get to meet the prophetess Aulia a little bit more, and we journey to find a prophecy or book she uncovered, since she's a prophetess who foretold the end of Haven somehow. Get it? Prophecies and forbidden knowledge. Like I said, fanfiction needs to have a little bit of deviation. It's a little bit too obvious here where the inspiration came from, but I'm not going to complain. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Anyway, the conclusion of this revelation is that Luch fights Judas to put him in house arrest, and we go and find a book which pads out the story. This forms the core of chapter 4. And after that, in chapter 5, which is the interesting part, a plot is formed by Judas's supporters who break him out of jail. There is quite a divide in the Haven society. I think it's a generational divide according to the story, but some people think that he's crazy because he's sacrificing people to defeat chaos, and some people think that he's a hero. However, everything comes to a boil at a chaos region called the Foretold End. The SS Nightmare crew confront Judas, and he turns into this angel-like form in his second stage and spams cards called the Lord's Benediction to clutter your deck with useless cards. Thanks, Judas. Anyway, before that, Judas Luch fights him, and there's a poignant line from Judas where he reviews the theme of this story. Luch wants to stop the senseless sacrifice that Judas is doing, but Judas rebukes her with pretty good voice acting, I might add, that her father died fighting chaos. Was his sacrifice in vain? And he turns into an angel almost immediately after that. I thought that was a very, very good line to show what was the main theme of the story. But after that, in the end, the crew beat Judas with Azalante out of nowhere. Where did she come from anyway? And there's a scene where Judas falls over and calls Azalante by the name of one of his fallen companions who sacrificed themselves. And as he looks at the Protoss, his final words are, "The Protoss is safe." And that was the moment I realized that, oh, so Judas's trauma is that he saw his friends, his own friends, which were called the golden generation of his era, die. And with that, chapter 5 ends on a very solemn note. At that point, we realize the theme of the story, which Mr. Lutz puts into a very, very good quote, which I will credit her with, which is, "We are all hurting, but no one is allowed to say it out loud except the one man we are condemning as a monster for expressing it." Now, if there is a VTuber coded story, that's it right there. That's it right there. I would not have been able to write something like this. It's really, really good when you think about it. Except we now come to the dramaturgical diagnosis of what went wrong with the story. Chaos Zero Nightmare is a tragedy that is marketed, structured, framed as a hero party shonen drama. But for the entirety of the Haven arc, the actual emotional protagonist is actually Judas, the failed Golden Generation hero who cannot let the dead go. And it betrays your expectations because Anybody who is used to playing gacha games is going to expect that the Protoss or the First is going to be the main protagonist. You are going to have the emotional investment in him. You're going to invest your emotions in the SS Nightmare crew. You're going to invest your emotions in the cute girls, the Bibu XP. The story's foundation rests on these three characters, and it's okay because they're going to join the SS Nightmare very soon. But the emotional axis, the actual person that you would be following throughout the entire story, is Judas. And honestly, this throws people for a loop. It even threw me for a loop because I was not expecting it. Like I said, it didn't hit me until the very, very end of the story of Chapter 5. And it's going to take you at least 2 weeks to get to Chapter 5, even if you play in a way that hopefully does not disrupt your daily life. Like I do. So coming in, people expected a tragedy. Maybe a gacha game tragedy, but a tragedy nonetheless. And they were looking for the tragedy with the SS Nightmare crew and the Protoss. But the Haven arc is actually a story about Judas's personal grief cult, survivor's guilt, and a man who is still speaking to dead friends that he cannot bury in his mind. That's the main emotional arc. And vast majority of people are just not going to get that. Now that I've explained so far, maybe you'll get the feeling for why I think that Judas feels like a main character. I think that our stage director is a lot more observant than me in noticing that Judas is the only person whose pain is seen, not told. His arc has the setup, the escalation, the revelation, the collapse. It's a very, very traditional shonen hero's story. And we like that. We like that kind of story. And you can see that at the very, very end, which is why I ask you to read to the end before I explain it for you, because it really pulls you back into the story. Because this man, at the very last moments, when he dies, what he sees are his dying friends. He has this imagination that Azalante is actually the Fiend, which is his comrade who has died already. You could say that, oh, he's trapped in a delusion, but I think that Mr. Luz is more accurate in saying that it's a regression to the moments he throws in a trauma. Doesn't excuse what he did, doesn't really make him less of a bad guy, but it makes you feel for him. Meanwhile, the Protoss has zero emotional arc at all, and we are supposed to get invested in him. Luge is someone who is antagonistic to Sir Judas, but at the same time, there's no suffering on her side. She does nothing. Azalante is mostly the same. She's a bit like a prop. Very pretty and cute girl prop, but a prop all the same. And Aurelia, as much as I like her very much, she's more a plot device than a character, and she's there to find a prophecy for the rest of the guys, which we never really see at the end. I'm pretty sure that something was cut out from the story on this part, on Aurelia's part. So the core problem is that the audience cannot emotionally align with the non-Judas viewpoints. We simply are not invested at all because the story makes you feel for Judas at the very, very end. And in the path to this ending, the payoff for the story, it feels really, really weird because we're a little bit confused. Who's the real protagonist in this story? Who is the story actually about? The audience unconsciously realize that the story is lying about who the protagonist is. The protagonist is not the Protoss. It's not anywhere one on the SS Nightmare crew. It's certainly not Owen. And that is what causes the cognitive dissonance. I'm not even sure if the author intended this cognitive dissonance, because if they did, they are really too talented for their own good. So once you understand that Judas is the main character of the Haven arc, you are going to realize that there is a clash of themes here. Story is trying to fit shoujo tropes and shonen tropes at the same time. That was my initial impression. So I'm a guy and I read Shonen Jump, so of course I'm going to think this way. Vast majority of gacha players are guys, and I think that Mr. Lewis has a very good insight on the archetype if explained from a shoujo perspective. The archetype of Judas is the noble failure who cannot grieve. Basically, he is this hurt being, very emotional, and it's even said so in the story that he is unable to show his more delicate side. And Haven Society punishes him because Haven Society on the outside is this happy place where we pretend that everything is fine and nobody is hurt by the pain we carry. So everything is carried on Judas, which is a very, very good inversion on the biblical trope that it is trying to carry. In Mr. Lowe's words, these logics are not opposite. They reinforce each other into emotional stagnation. So the narrative tone becomes, we are all hurting, but no one is allowed to say it out loud except the one man we are condemning as a monster for expressing it. The core of this story is the moral inversion of the mythological figure that you have an idea about, you have a fixed image of, and a reasonable audience can feel but not articulate. What is Judas's problem? Judas is punished by society, by the SS Nightmare crew, the heroes of the story, for loving the dead a little bit too honestly, and honestly, dealing with chaos. Meanwhile, Lush and Azalante are praised for fighting the guy who is obviously suffering from trauma. And this is the entire theme of the game, that everybody is suffering from trauma. And in Mr. Loser's own words, the story never resolves which posture is correct until the very, very end. So the emotional center of the story collapses at the moment that Judas ascends and becomes a chaos being at the end of chapter 5. Dum dum dum, the biggest spoilers in the entire video. Told you to read, why didn't you read? I told you to read, now you regret it. Now the forbidden knowledge is in your hands and you cannot unremember it. And that's why the audience is constantly left asking the question, what is this guy's problem? And if you only read until chapter 3 and 4, you would get the opinion that, oh, Judas is kinda crazy, and you have no attachment to the SS Nightmare crew, and then you have to grind for maybe 1 or 2 weeks until you get to chapter 5. You have to read until the very end of the Haven arc in order to get it. Which means that the emotional payoff does not form until the very, very end, where everybody has already formed an opinion on Judas and the character of the SS Nightmare crew already. I don't know if it's genius on the writer's part, because, you know, Judas in the myth in the Bible is supposed to be someone that everybody denigrates. But at the end, you have this really, really big inversion. Oh, this guy is suffering from trauma as well. To put it very, very simply, the story's emotional thesis arrives after the audience has already formed their alignment, which is why everybody has this disconnect. It's very likely that they have not reached chapter 5 yet. And for many inexperienced writers, they would think that the quick fix is really, really simple. Oh, just add more foreshadowing at the end, give Lush and Aurelia more backstory. And that is exactly what happened in chapter 3 and 4. We are introduced to Lush and Aurelia and Azalante a lot more than we see Judas' side of the story. We don't need to see the Judas side of the story for it to work. Therein lies the trap. Therein lies the trap where we start to go into the realm of bad writing. To be honest, instinctively, I would fall into a trap as well, because I will reveal the trap to you with a very simple question from Mr. Lewis, and she asked me this. Do you think that Judas is the intended tragedy protagonist, or is he this happy accident that the writers simply did not have the spine to commit to? Your reading is going to affect how you perceive this story at the end. Take a moment to think about it for a while. I'm going to be here for a little bit while. I'm not going anywhere. Think about it for a little while, because I'm quite sure that if you understand what I'm talking about, you will come to the same conclusion as well. So I will review my viewpoint in 5 seconds. To answer Mr. Loser's questions, is Judas's characterization intended? I 100% believe that it was intended. 100%. Because, as you know, I have been reading Reincarnated Cthulhu lately, because I've been trying to figure out what exactly is the author trying to convey in the heart of the story of Chaos Zero Nightmare. And if the rumors are true that the lead writer for both stories are the same, it follows a very remarkably similar style to Reincarnated Cthulhu. Introduce a mythological character as the main pivot, either Alice, Frankenstein, werewolves, Dr. Hyde inside Reincarnated Cthulhu, and for Chaos Zero Nightmare, Judas himself. And there is a pseudo-occultic mystery that needs to be solved by the crew, by the main protagonist. The protagonist is a little bit more forward in Reincarnated Cthulhu, which I will admit that very, very handily. A lot more involved in things, which makes the story feel a lot more convincing and involved, because, you know, the protagonist is involved in things. But the writing style is very, very similar. We have a preconceived notion about a mythological figure. We have a preconceived image that forms in our mind of that character, and it guides how we perceive the story until the very, very end, and we think, so that is the inversion, the trick that the author has played on us, because what we think to be true about the guy that we know so much about is not true at all. It's a very ravages of time writing style, and depends on you understanding who this person is. And I think that the name Judas gets thrown around, and the name and the location name Haven, the kind of religious artifacts that are put on display. This is something that a lot of people are going to get, especially if you're a Westerner. So here comes the writing trap that most writers will fall into, which is trying to put the SS Nightmare crew as the main focus in the middle of the story. The gacha crowd expects the SS Nightmare crew to be the main focus, because, hey, we are the protagonists. We are the one that are playing this game. Why are we not involved in this game? Hence, there's a very heavy pivot to Slice of Life in chapters 3 and 4. You get really, really brief moments where Luce joins your party, Aulia joins your party, and you don't really get to play Aulia. But I have Aulia, so I can roleplay as her, and it was a lot more pleasant on my side. If you tell the players that the focus is actually on Judas, who you cannot pull with a gacha, by the way, they're going to lose interest. So it's actually a business decision. Essentially, the problem is that the story was not fully built for gacha. The story is good, the payoff is good, the character arc for Judas is written very, very well. Problem is, it's not written for gacha. It's not written for the game. It's not written for making the game money. Now, if you ask me, if Judas was this strong 5-star character with a ridiculous on-field transform move, nobody would complain. You know why? Because you built up Judas to be this really, really great character. He dies, of course, but because of the nature of the story, because you can run simulations and all this, you can just play him as a simulation. It just works as a story, unless you got rid of the plot point, which I think your problem, not mine at this point. because it's kind of like how Archons are recruitable in Genshin. We spend months and months and months building up Zhongli, so why not make some money off of it? Zhongli is recruitable by the end of the Liyue arc, and Zhongli sold like pancakes. Not sure if he's relevant at this point because I haven't played Genshin in a very, very long time since the Fontaine arc. It's a little bit strange, isn't it? Why is it that Judas doesn't get a character? Very simple. We want to sell Aurelia, we want to sell Azalante, we want to sell Luce because these three make for a much better selling experience. And also understandable from a production standpoint because we can't have a literal human sacrificer on the team. Then again, we have Tartaglia in Genshin, which released at almost the same time as Zhongli, which kind of torpedoes the idea that you cannot have bad guys on the team. I don't understand this one. Someone will have to explain the thing for me. Like maybe the producers think that, oh, the crowd is not going to buy into a male character because Judas is a male character. I don't understand that. If you market it well, if the story was sold well, if the payoff is good, I really don't think that's a problem because if you think about it, this is literally the same kind of character arc that Raiden Shogun gets, and Raiden Shogun is the best-selling character by far in Genshin for a very, very long time. So if you have listened so far, you might have accepted the idea that the whole arc is actually revolving around Judas as an emotional pivot. A lot of things make a lot of thematical sense after you understand that. For example, what is the main theme of the Haven arc? It's sacrifice. Judas is literally sacrificing people, and at the same time, he's also sacrificing his sanity, so to speak, in order to quell chaos. His comrades died, so he has to grieve in silence in order to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Even if the outsiders come in and criticize him, even if like the entire half of Haven doesn't like him, he still has to do what he thinks is right. That's why he's so hell-bent on trying to get rid of chaos, so nobody has to sacrifice ever again. This makes you appreciate two scenes in particular, almost at the very, very end of the story arc. One of them is which reveals that Judas and his date companions were also called the Golden Gendi, parallel to Luce, Azalante, and Aurelia. So it's a parallel story. It's a story that repeats over time. And of course, I've already shared with you, quite frankly, the scene where he rebukes Luce and asks her, was her father's sacrifice all in vain? Once you understand this, you realize what Judas is trying to do. He's trying to become the last person who has to suffer. He's trying to absorb the human cost of the world. When I put it like this, Westerners will immediately understand what I'm talking about. This is the inversion. This is the genius of the writing. He's saying that if I take on the pain, if I take on the monster, if I become the monster, then nobody else has to. And in shonen terms, this is the guy who falls to the dark side in order to protect someone. Our stage director, Mr. Luce, looks at this from a more shoujo perspective, since he falls into the shoujo archetype of the one who cannot allow himself to grieve, because if he breaks, the world breaks as well. At first I really didn't understand this one until it was explained to me a little bit. Think about it for a while. To test your understanding whether you actually understood the themes, you actually understood the character of Judas and the heart of the story itself. Here is the very same question that Mr. Luce asks of me at the very end of our conversation. If Judas did die happily, truly at peace, what would have to change in Haven's worldview for that to be possible? Not a rewrite, not a fix. What truth would Haven have to accept for Judas to finally rest? My answer to this might be a little bit different from yours, because I also think about the business side of the game when I think about it from the game developer side. Don't forget, Chaos Zero Nightmare is a video game, so it has to make money. It is interested in going on as long as possible. So fans of Code Geass might immediately recognize this trope and realize, oh, that's the ending of Code Geass. And you would be absolutely right. I'm not going to answer directly. You can think about it on yourself. But the idea is very, very simple. If the truth got out that Judas was actually a good person, then who is the bad guy in this arc? Because if you want Lush and Azalante to be gacha characters, that would really cast them in a bad light. And you can start to see the business decisions, the social dimensions of it. Gacha players expect cute girls to be their pools. And personally, I would admit, I wouldn't pull for Judas even if he appeared on the banner because I'm a guy, obviously. But if Lush and Azalante are actually the bad guys, that is going to affect a lot of things. So no, Haven's story must end here. The cycle continues. And no wonder there's dissonance, because once you uncover this side of the story and you link it to the business side of things, you would feel nothing if Haven's story ends there. In fact, it's pretty much good for the game if Haven's story ends there. And that's the tragedy of the entire thing. Haven cannot change. It can't change. It's trapped in its own nightmare. And with that, I thought that was a pretty good line to conclude this little dramaturgical analysis of the Chaos Zero Nightmare story. The reason why you feel emotional dissonance when reading the Haven arc is not because of any surface level reason, but because the twist comes at a very, very late stage. Emotional payoff for this story only comes at the very, very end. And even then, most people will not expect this level of a story inside a gacha game. People expect the story to revolve around the SS Nightmare crew, and when it doesn't, it fails their expectations. Regardless of whatever happened behind the scenes, I hope that after my analysis, my dramaturgical analysis, you can see that the skeleton of the story is still preserved. Not entirely, but it's still preserved a little bit. The theme of sacrifice, whether the sacrifice has meaning, is tied into the cycle of suffering that the characters go through. Now, I wouldn't say that Judas is 100% a good guy, but I also wouldn't say that it's as simple as he's the bad guy, let's beat him up. Because Judas is not trying to stop death. He's trying to make sure that the deaths that have already happened there in Haven are not in vain. And at the same time, to subtly answer my own question, which I threw at you just now, if this is true, then Haven must paint Judas as a bad guy because Haven does not want to heal. Because healing would mean that you're admitting all those deaths were just lost and has zero divine purpose at all. I'm not theologically inclined, but I'm pretty sure that scares a theological person much more than it scares me. The nightmare continues because people would rather feel pain with meaning than relief that admits that there was never meaning at all. This is the source of Judas's grief, and this is the source of Judas's trauma. So now you know the entire Haven arc is actually one big arc for Judas's trauma code. And nobody realizing this is the real tragedy of the story. The end. Now, in dramaturgical tradition, I like to ask questions of people to test their understanding. You don't have to take my interpretations as truth. There could be many truths. But if you have played all the way to the end, all the way to the Judas boss fight, you will realize that he has a very special mechanic where he gives you a certain card called the Lord's Benediction. Read the effects on the card and try to pair it up with the themes, with the idea of sacrifice and cycles of grief that I've been trying to instill in you. When you think about it a little bit, I think you will be very pleasantly surprised that, oh, the author actually hid the main theme of this story in plain sight.